Ottawa is expected to announce plans for a high-speed rail line linking Toronto and Montreal. The project has been promised before but never delivered, and some experts think the price tag might get in the way again. CBC's Rowan Kennedy explains.
The federal government is expected to move forward with plans to build a high-speed rail network that connects Quebec City and Toronto. So we asked experts whether they think this time it will finally work. Canada is the only G7 country without an intercity high-speed or high-frequency rail system in the works. Ottawa has been studying several proposals. Sources tell Radio-Canada the Fed now has picked a winning bidder. Tracks would stretch from Quebec City to Toronto and include stops in Trois-Rivières, Laval, Montreal, Ottawa, and Peterborough. Every single day, about 50 domestic flights make the trip between Montreal and Toronto, and experts say that's unsustainable.
We have to take vehicles off the road, we have to take vehicles out of the air, and we have to move people and freight on more sustainable means of transportation.
Do you think it's going to happen?
No, too big, too expensive. We don't have the political will to do it.
Experts estimate the cost of building the network will range from $80 to $120 billion. Trains are expected to be mostly electric and able to reach speeds up to 300 kilometers per hour. Here's how long your commutes could take: Toronto to Montreal in 3 hours instead of 6 hours by car, or 5 hours by via rail. Montreal to Quebec City in an hour instead of 3, and going from Montreal to Ottawa could take less than an hour by high-speed train. So why is Via Rail so slow? Well, one reason is it has to share the tracks with freight cars, which have the right-of-way.
If you provide very high-speed service with frequent trains and affordable prices, you can get a lot of people to take the train. We're talking quadrupling of the number of current riders on Via. I think it depends on whether the federal government in Canada, combined with the provinces of Ontario and Quebec, can agree on a stable source of funding that ensures the completion of the project.
Research suggests high-speed rail lines can help ease the cost of housing and get cars off the road by making it easier for people to live farther away from major cities. Quebec mayors are optimistic about it boosting tourism and business, but experts say if it happens, it's likely still at least a decade away.
Well, for more on the future prospects of Canadian high-speed rail, we have reached Matti Siemiatycki in Toronto. He is the director of the Infrastructure Institute at the University of Toronto. Matti, thanks for being here tonight.
For sure. It's nice to be with you.
High-speed rail, it has been a dream that has been discussed since the 90s. Will this dream finally turn into a reality?
This certainly has been on the books and something that's been talked about and dreamt about for decades. This is the closest it's come. We're now in the midst of a procurement, and we have cabinet saying they are seriously considering high-speed rail and ready to give it the go-ahead. So this is the furthest it's come. The question now is, what does the plan actually look like? How much will it cost? And is this really something that Canadians want at this moment, given all the challenges we're facing in our country?
And what is your sense of that, if this is something that Canadians want? Because Canada right now is the only G7 nation without high-speed rail.
That's absolutely true. We are the only country, G7 country, without high-speed rail, but we also have many other struggles in this country. We have a doctor shortage, we have an affordable housing crisis, we have Indigenous communities without safe drinking water and housing, and we have local public transit systems that are really struggling with their operating and capital costs. So I think ultimately the question is this the moment to spend a huge amount of money? The estimates are looking like it's between 80 and 100 and 120 billion dollars for this project. Is this really where we want to sink all of this treasure, all of this muscle to build out this project, or should the resources be spent better somewhere else?
And what's your sense of kind of the PR battle? Because this is a long-term project, and selling that idea to Canadians when they're not going to see it in a couple of months or even a few years.
These big infrastructure projects are being built for decades and centuries, not for years. So this is long-term. But again, we're struggling with all these other issues in the country. Today's announcement was really an announcement to get to the starting line. We're not even at the starting line yet. They haven't picked a contractor yet. They still have to design the project. They have to release all the details about the budget and how fast it's actually going to go and the travel time. So there's a long way to go. This was an announcement, and we also have to hear from the opposition, who's leading in the polls right now. What's their take on this project? Is this something that would die if and when there's a change of government?
You know, we hear a lot about private-public partnerships. Do you see this project as being kept wholly public, or do you think that the private sector will step in some capacity?
The track that it's on now, it's being called an alliance model. This will include the private sector. The private sector is going to work with the government to design it, and then it looks like they will ultimately operate it. We've had problems with public-private partnerships in Canada of late. The Eglinton Crosstown line is woefully delayed and not open yet. We have the Ottawa LRT, so there are some setbacks. We're going to see if this one is done any better, if it's not a partnership but an alliance. We'll have to see if that delivers better results.
Do you think that that would alleviate some concerns if there is some private sector involvement here, that the cost is not going to and the budget won't balloon out of control as we have seen in some other projects?
Transportation projects across the country are ballooning. We're building transit projects where the cost per kilometer is between $500 million and $750 million, and in some cases upwards of $1 billion per kilometer. It is to be expected that the costs are going to be high and will likely balloon. Many of those projects themselves were delivered through public-private partnerships. So the delivery model is not a savior in and of itself. It's going to require detailed coordination, attention to detail, and making sure that the public sector and the private sector have the expertise and the capacity to deliver this project effectively.
Do you think that we have enough people, enough population density to make a project like this worthwhile?
I think we do, but I think ultimately the question is about trade-offs. I mean, Via Rail right now in this corridor is carrying around 4 million people. It could go up 4 million per year. To put that in perspective, the TTC carries about 2.5 million people per day, and the Montreal Metro carries 1 million per day. So there are other areas where we're carrying huge numbers of people. And the question again is whether this amount of cost, 80 billion to 120 billion, is really the best place to be making those investments when there's so many other projects and so many other areas, and in the transportation world alone, let alone across our entire economy and communities, where we could be making other investments.
And you know, with all of these additional pressures and pulls, how do you see this conversation playing out in the next few years about making high-speed rail a reality in Canada?
This is going to need a constituency behind it. Projects of this scale don't just happen because the government forces it from the top down. It's going to need a groundswell of support, and we still haven't seen exactly who that constituency is. Are there people in the country clamoring for this? Does this become an election issue that people run on and say, I will get this project done because this is what Canadians want and need? Or are Canadians ultimately looking for other things and the politicians are going to look elsewhere? In Canada, you have both a top-down approach where governments propose projects, but also they require bottom-up support if they're really going to go forward. And it remains to be seen who the constituency is and how hard they push to make this project a reality.
Okay, Matti, appreciate your time and perspective on this one. That is Matti Siemiatycki, the director of the Infrastructure Institute at the University of Toronto.